On September 14th, Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky walked into what can only be described as hell on earth. It was just days after Ukrainian forces recaptured the city of Izium, and President Zelensky wanted to assess the damage personally. The once picturesque riverside city was now unrecognizable. Mass graves were filled with hundreds of unidentified bodies, including children. Bodies with crushed skulls, victims' hands tied behind their backs, faces mutilated beyond recognition, many showing signs of torture. It was the same sickening scene we saw in Bucha and in other towns that have been so-called liberated from Russian forces. We must not look away. We must face this squarely. We must bear witness to these heinous acts, which is why we have images of these crimes around the hearing room today. I met with Ukrainian Prosecutor General Andrei Kostin last week. He told me the Ukrainians have documented nearly 35,000 war crimes like the ones you see in these images since Russia's illegal, unprovoked invasion of Ukraine. As Russia escalates its war, the free nations of the world cannot sit back. We must uphold our nation's legacy from Nuremberg, where the United States led the prosecution of Nazi war criminals, by bringing today's perpetrators of war crimes and crimes against humanity to justice. I'd like to turn to a video on the importance of that legacy.
I am heartbroken to see it happening again. Kids being shot, homes being blown up. It pains me to see that we have learned so little from the Holocaust.
I have one word to describe, and it's just hell. It was just going to recover dead bodies of our friends.
Де батька. Я їй сказав, що нас розстріляли, і батька вже нема.
He tells me how an SS officer nearly killed him in 1941, and now he's survived a Russian onslaught 8 decades later.
Human beings buried in unmarked graves. 99% were killed by violence, and some of the bodies show signs of torture. We met a woman who had to witness the exhumation of her own son, who'd been tortured and murdered by Russian soldiers. We visited a room right there that Russian occupiers used for torture, and now that mass burial site that we see there in Izium.
As for now, more civilians than soldiers. Wherever Russian army steps in, they turn everything into Bucha.
We have all been seeing the pictures and reading the reports regarding the devastation, the human cost to civilians, men, women and children. Nobody is above the law, nobody's beneath it.
Ukraine is today a slaughterhouse.
The wrongs which we seek to condemn and punish have been so calculated, so malignant and so devastating that civilization cannot tolerate their being ignored.
When the Nuremberg trials first convened in 1945, Supreme Court Justice Robert Jackson was the chief prosecutor. He recognized that the best corrective to the brutish lawlessness of the Nazis was the rule of law. He deemed the trials, quote, one of the most significant tributes that power has ever paid to reason. Those words echoed through history last week when President Zelensky called on the world's leaders to ensure that the perpetrators of atrocities in Ukraine can find no safe haven anywhere in the world. We must continue to support Ukraine's efforts to prosecute war criminals, and we must support the International Criminal Court's investigation of atrocities in Ukraine. But it's also up to this body to ensure that our laws here at home do not enable this terrible deed. More than a decade ago, I had the honor of chairing the Senate's first ever subcommittee on human rights and the law. Last year, as chair of the Judiciary Committee, I was pleased to reconstitute this subcommittee now chaired by Senator Feinstein. Over the years, we had a number of bipartisan accomplishments, including the Genocide Accountability Act, which granted the Justice Department power to prosecute war criminals on American soil who had participated in genocide. The Child Soldiers Accountability Act, which made it illegal under U.S. law to recruit or use child soldiers. But our work is far from finished. A number of shameful loopholes in America's laws continue to enable war criminals and perpetrators of crimes against humanity to find safe haven in the United States. Sounds unbelievable, doesn't it? But in 2006, Marko Baskic, a man who participated in the Srebrenica genocide in Bosnia, was discovered living in Massachusetts. Rather than charging him with crimes against humanity, our government charged Baskic with visa fraud. Why? Because our nation still, to this day, does not have a law in the books prohibiting crimes against humanity. Do you want to risk reading a headline 10 years from now about a Russian who murdered civilians in Ukraine enjoying impunity in America? I certainly don't. That's why I've introduced the Justice for Victims of War Crimes Act with my ranking member, Senator Grassley, as co-sponsor. This bill has been co-sponsored as well by Senators Leahy, Graham, Coons, and Blunt, and will close a loophole in the War Crimes Act so that foreign war criminals present in our country can be prosecuted even if they're discovered here years after the crimes. I look forward to working with my colleagues to pass this bill and enact a bipartisan Crimes Against Humanity statute as well. Before turning to Senator Grassley, I might say that after the meeting with the Prosecutor General from Ukraine last week, a bipartisan group, Senator Portman, who co-chairs the Ukraine caucus with me, Senator Graham, Jean Shaheen, and Senator Ossoff, are joining in an effort to see the best approach to dealing with these war crimes and crimes against humanity in Ukraine. It is an active effort. It has involved follow-on meetings and will continue to. I'll now turn to Ranking Member Grassley for his opening remarks.